you want to connect with your motherland, you want to connect with the feminine, that means like accepting this body. We're only just beginning to really actually awaken into what's been lost. I was seeing a therapist at that point because I was having severe anxiety and panic, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you taking birth control?" He just hadn't thought to ask me, and he was like, "Oh my God, you need to go off right now." To add in technology into that mix feels really dangerous to me because we don't know our bodies enough. We haven't reclaimed it enough. What would it mean to freeze an egg? Like, what would it mean if I don't and I trust life and the process of my body and the process of time and earth and everything that my body's made up of in this time? This idea that we could find equality in our difference in a gendered way is still so edgy.
There's something in me that feels like something is broken in our culture, where this is the solution we're being presented with that has so many consequences.
It never goes well when we play God.
My name is Simone Leone, and welcome to Meaning Making Machines. I'm so excited to welcome back Sylvia Linsteadt to the show. This is our second conversation that we decided to record because our first one we started so many lines of dialogue that we didn't have enough time to finish. So we sort of expand on a lot of the things that we talked about in the first conversation. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, I would go and listen to that one first because it helps inform a lot of the things that we end up discussing on today's episode. If you don't know her already, Sylvia is an author and a scholar of ancient history and myth. She is also a certified wildlife tracker. Her work in both fiction and nonfiction is rooted in myth, ecology, feminism, and bioregionalism. And you can catch some of her latest writing on her Substack and learn more about her on her website, sylviavictorlinstead.com. This conversation is really exciting one for me because we talk all about the feminine, what technologies affect women specifically in terms of reproductive technologies. We talk about the feminine wisdom that's rooted in the body and a lot of the brokenness and feelings that we have around growing up as women in the modern world, and what it would take to sort of heal a lot of those feelings that we have, and how sometimes technology geared towards helping women can actually harm us in the long run. So there's a lot of consequences that we talk about that have to do with things like artificial gestation, which doesn't exist yet, but I think will probably come into existence in the near future. We talk about birth control. We talk about egg freezing. We talk about all of those things, and especially something that is important to me is how to unite both men and women, both the masculine and feminine, and how we can look towards the past to help heal some of the ills in our culture, and how we also need to be aware of the trade-offs that have to do with technology and unintended consequences. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. I had a lot of time talking with her for a second time, and there will probably be a third episode at some point in the future with Sylvia, because once we get talking, we have a hard time stopping. So Sylvia, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
Our first conversation was so fruitful and rich that we felt like we needed to just do another continuation of it.
Yes.
And I was replaying our last conversation, and I thought that we got to some really interesting points where we were connecting Greek gods, aliens, and us modern humans, and just sort of this feeling of the trying to understand this feeling of like disconnection that we all feel, and how we can look to the myths of the Greek gods, which were like very prescient in describing this sense of disconnection we feel from the earth and this lack of animism, however you want to coin it, and how the idea of aliens is now in our like modern, it's like one of our modern myths
Yes.
You could possibly look at it that way.
I think you could say that, yeah.
Whether or not they are literally here, there is maybe something about us that, like you said, feels alien. Like we feel there's some like injection of alienness in how we feel compared to other animals. And also our interest in the deep past, we feel in some senses like aliens trying to understand our deep ancestors who were so much closer to the land.
Yeah. That's a beautiful summary. Yeah, and such an unexpected place that we ended up, I think, to both of us, which was thrilling.
It was so
to
unexpected.
Make those connections. Yeah.
But I think those connections are speaking to something deeper that is the reason that's why I'm doing this show in the first place, feeling like in some ways we're very far gone, but in some ways it feels like we are at this hinge point that I don't know if technology will go so far that we'll reach this point of no return. That's my fear.
Like disembodied no return. Yeah.
And that's something that has come to me in dreams, that I've had that feeling like we're going to reach that point and people are going to start to have to make really big decisions on how far they're going to go. And that's like why I wanted to talk about those things. And I wanted to bring this discussion to talk about the specifically feminine angle of that.
Yes.
And something I'd like to start us off with is, what are your thoughts on the ways that technology might disconnect females specifically from our bodies? Something I was thinking about too with the idea of pregnancy and birth and those things becoming, managed in a laboratory, or even gestation happening outside of a woman's body. Have you thought about that and what deeper implications that might have for us?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. This is such an important question. Such a big one. Like, this is like the heart of my heart in a way, or my passion and my concern and my ongoing process of learning and almost like initiation, I want to say, because I think one thing I want to say is that I think what it means to fully activate our feminine consciousness, which is absolutely, for me, interfused with the physical. So the feminine consciousness is like deeply rooted in the body. It's the body knowing. It's the earth body knowing, the opposite of the disembodied, kind of wanting to ascend beyond or transcend the body toward God. Motions that we can see in monotheistic religions, even though with Christianity as an example, as we've talked about, I'm not sure that was really the original point, but we can save that for another part of this conversation. Yeah. But so for me, the activation of feminine consciousness, because we've lived, and this is just my opinion from reading and feeling and living, but just as a caveat, that is just my opinion. Because Western culture has been so dominated by a masculine way of being and a privileging of male ways of being, to even access what the feminine actually means for us and to really live from that place is really hard, I think, for us, because it requires us to actually inhabit our bodies again. And that's really scary, because our bodies are where we get sick, and our bodies are where we have panic attacks, speaking personally from my own experience. Our bodies are where we actually metabolize challenging emotion, and that can be devastating feeling. Our bodies are where mental illness actually really affects us. And all of those things are facets of things I feel like I've had to really look at and sit with since particularly that moment, which I did talk about, right? Of my divorce and the prayer to heal my mother line and the journey of the mother line, and finding as I made that prayer and as I made that call out to the universe, I got pulled on a 7-year journey. And the 7 years, is quite uncanny because the number 7 is connected to many myths of descent of the feminine in the Mediterranean and the Near East in the, Bronze Age and Neolithic. So like, okay, 7 years of descent and of like what's felt like dismemberment of like, you want to connect with your motherland, you want to connect with the feminine. That means like accepting this body. And I'm still on that journey, but like allowing your emotions to actually be dark and difficult and be sort of composted and digested through your physical body, not outside of you. And there's so much I could say about that, but I feel like because, I think that this journey for women to reclaim the feminine, what it actually means to embrace the female body, and culturally to embrace the feminine principle in all bodies, because we all, as the Jungian analyst,
come from bodies.
We all come from bodies, and we all also, like, according to the kind of psychological principles that are compelling at this time, have masculine and feminine attributes, and I think that feels really valid and true. So our feminine is out of balance no matter what body you're in, whether male or female. And I think, I feel like in the last, maybe since the 70s particularly, I'm thinking of like the goddess movement in the United States, of women really turning to reclaim feminine faces of God and of divinity. That I feel like that really started to get to be a big deal at that time. It's really such a young process still in our consciousness. And so I'm saying all of that to come back to your question, because it feels like
even last talk you talked about archaeology even just being like a new science in the late 19th century, I think,
or like maybe mid 19th century,
bringing up all of these ancient feminine divine practices and faces.
Yeah, exactly. Like seeing these bodies, of figurines rise up out of the earth, and the
unapologetically voluptuous,
just like everything. Unapologetically voluptuous, vulvas like really front and center in red, just like really so different than what we've been sort of fed for the last thousands of years in the West. But I guess what I'm thinking is like, even though it can feel like, I feel like you and I have talked about this, that because we've both grown up in the wake of different waves of feminism, and I feel like this is a common kind of feeling that women can have, that like, oh, well, we're equal now. Like we've done that. It's done. It's healed. Like it's okay. We can do what we want. Like we can do what men can do. And so many rights have been like gained back through the different waves of feminism in the 20th century. But I feel like we're only just beginning to really actually awaken into what's been lost. If you have 2,000 years of repression or more, it takes more than a century.
Yeah. And it takes more than maybe just material changes and laws.
Exactly. Yeah.
To gain those things back.
Yeah. And so I think, and I've not really thought about this all like in a moment, in the way that your question is bringing it into my psyche right now, like the way that, okay, so take all of that, and then this question of technology in the female body and pregnancy, or just where those things meet. Like, it's like we're just in this big moment of awakening. And I'm thinking of the fact that, since I was a teenager 20 years ago when I was 15 to now, the idea of womb healing or womb consciousness was not a thing when I was a teenager. And it is everywhere now. In some ways that are a little bit sometimes kind of like I'm not so sure about. But overall, that's like really incredible and so recent. And so it's like we're still just beginning to actually be able to have the technologies again. But what I would say when I say technologies there, I mean like ancient body natural technologies of like meditation and visualization and learning herbs and learning how to feel and dream with our wombs and with the moon and with everything, we're just returning to that in the West. And so then to add in technology into that mix feels really dangerous to me, because we don't know our bodies enough we haven't reclaimed it enough. And the temptation that, well, I don't know if I want to say temptation. It just feels like it makes me worried. I think that's what I would say. I don't quite know what my opinion even is, but it gives me like this panic response, like a warning in like at the back of my neck, almost like, okay, hold on. Like, for example, and I say this with no judgment, but I notice, no judgment of anybody who's made this kind of choice, but I notice when friends of mine talk to me about egg freezing, because I'm 35 and I want a baby, and I happen to not, like, the partner baby scene is not like lined up for me well. And here I am suddenly with that animal longing, and it in so many ways is a really good idea that a lot of women are being offered. Okay, you can freeze your eggs so that you aren't waiting or seeking just the right partner and racing against time because of your biological clock. And I have friends in their 40s who missed that window and found the love of their life in their 40s and can no longer conceive. And it's devastating. It's devastating beyond devastating when that longing overtakes your body and you can't have it. And I don't even know what that feels like at that age. But what I do know is that the feeling I have in my body when I imagine freezing my eggs is like really emotional and really not sure about it, because I feel like I've hardly had enough time yet in my lifetime, because so much of this is this liberation that and what I was talking about, that we can finally like talk about womb consciousness and womb circles like freely, and it's like everywhere. It's so new to me that I pray and I long for that quiet communion with my own body, to be able to really understand, like, what would it mean to freeze an egg? Like, what would it mean if I don't? And I trust life and the process of my body and the process of time and earth and everything that my body's made up of in this time, and what my destiny is of meeting somebody or not meeting somebody. And if I'm not meant to have a baby, maybe there's a design beyond my possible conception that I can't see. And I may change my tune on this, but right now it's just bringing up all of those questions. It's so easy to just jump on.
I agree with you. I have that same sense of brokenness, I think, that comes up when things like egg freezing are mentioned. And just specifically the female perspective of it is I was reading an article the other day about this woman who's dealing with health consequences that she thinks are a result of egg donation. I don't know if it's a little different, the process medically.
But it might not be.
It might not be that different.
Yeah.
But she's like, she was donating eggs, I think, to help pay for college. And now, around 10 years later, she wants to have a baby and she can't conceive. And she thinks that a lot of these fertility issues come from the hormones you have to take. I'm not exactly sure the science behind it, but for me, I understand the impulse to want to freeze eggs, but there's something in me that feels like something is broken in our culture, where this is the solution we're being presented with that has so many consequences for women specifically. Like, if a man wants to freeze his sperm or donate his sperm, it's nothing. It's just whatever.
It's literally like what they do every other day anyway. Or every day.
Exactly. It's nothing, but obviously as women carry the full consequences of sex in our bodies. Men, they don't.
Yeah.
And I think it's in the same way the consequences of using technology to meddle with this. And we had a similar experience on birth control.
Yeah,
when we were younger. I was just thinking
of birth control. Yeah.
Where I took it for maybe like 2 or 3 months, and I had such awful side effects that nobody told me about. I was not given any warning, and I had such bad mental health symptoms, and they went away as soon as I went off them, but my cycle took years to normalize, and I felt there. And I know a lot of women take hormonal birth control, and it's just a part of their lives, and maybe they're not as affected by it. But I feel, in some ways, like women are the testing grounds and the canaries in the coal mine for a lot of this reproductive technology.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and well said. And also what was just coming to my mind was like, you know, in medical research, I feel like it's only very recently that female doctors are really taking more control, able to take more control of research about female bodies and about like how, you know, for example, side effects for medications are measured by male bodies, and you can't just lower the dose and think that that's what works for a female body, because our bodies work really differently hormonally. So that model is so recently being challenged, but hormonal birth control got created, I don't know, like the 70s, or it was a long time ago, and you can bet you it probably wasn't female doctors. I mean, I don't know, but like, I just wonder, I think because that research on female bodies is really, really recent, shockingly so, like really shockingly, way more recent than it should be.
Well, they didn't want to research right on female bodies because we're complicated. We have a cycle. Every day is different. And men are just, they have a 24-hour hormonal cycle, so it's just easier to do research.
But it's like,
them.
wow, think about like what that statement is suggesting. Like, oh, women are too complicated. Like, we'll just do it on men and hope that it kind of sort of works.
Yeah,
or it's like, no wonder, you know, I wonder about that and the fact that women seem to statistically be way more likely to have chronic disease, chronic illnesses, immune system, like chronic problems, inflammation problems. I wonder, you know, what medication and being dosed for men that women are given. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about there that I'm also not like...
I'm not an expert, but it doesn't surprise me when I learn about those things.
No. And I was just going to say with birth control too, I remember, you know, despite growing up in a time where I didn't ever feel as a little girl at all inferior to boys. I didn't have any, you know, I was raised to believe I was equal, and I was taught that way in school. But when it came to like sex education, and then that moment when I was about 18 and I had my first boyfriend, and, you know, I had my visit with the gynecologist, and she was like, well, now's the time. How about birth control? And I was like, well, that sounds easy, and that's what everybody does. And it's like these little pretty, like,
I know they're cute
package. It's kind of pink, and like the pill's really small, and wow, like that's fun. You just take the pills and you don't have to think about it. And it seemed like what everybody did, and what you did as a mature girl, like a mature young woman, you did that. And I took it for 2 years or 3 years.
I didn't realize it was that long.
And it coincided with me going away to college, and I had a long distance relationship. And so I was having a lot of anxiety and emotional turmoil anyway because of the change. So it took me a while to realize that actually something worse was going on than just, you know, homesickness and separation, like grief, but that it really affected my mental health too. And like severely so. And finally, about 2.5 years in, I was seeing a therapist at that point because I was having severe anxiety and panic. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you taking birth control?" He just hadn't thought to ask me. And he was like, "Oh my God, you need to go off right now." And he was like a legit, you know, decades in therapist for anxiety disorders. And he said, "I have forbidden my daughter, who's a little younger than me, to go on it. And I would never let my wife either, because I know what the psychological side effects are."
That feels so rare to find somebody who...
Isn't that gratifying? Yeah. But then when I went to my gynecologist and told her I was stopping, she looked at me and she said, "Well, that's not true. Those aren't the side effects."
The conversation I had with mine. That's not true. You're crazy. And then even when I asked before I started taking it, is there anything I need to know? No.
Like, what? That must be in your head.
Our whole way of functioning, our whole inner way of functioning as a woman. You're altering it.
And then somebody's going to look at you and say, mental health side effects aren't possible. But you're tricking your body to think you're pregnant constantly for years. Just like, and you have anyway, it's symptomatic of the larger pattern, I feel like, that we're talking about. And I think just back to what you were saying about the feeling of brokenness that comes up for you, I feel like that's a really poignant way to describe it, because it's like we've been taken away from the deep wisdom of our bodies and of women's knowledge that would have been passed down from mothers, from grandmothers, from midwives, from just wise older women and the collective of women in our communities. We've been taken away from that for so long that it...
Do you mean on how to control whether or not you get pregnant if you're having sex, things like that, or even what ovulation is,
all of it,
or your timing,
everything, and then also conceiving, you know, and what your body is really trying to tell you, or what your body's really longing for, on a both physical, literal level, but also a spiritual, emotional level. You know, all of those layers we've been taken away from for so long. And so I think what I would pray for is a resurgence of those ancient technologies alongside, you know, the support. And I think we're seeing that,
in apps.
Actually, yeah, or in, yeah. But just like the option of deep, like, womb work is held alongside egg freezing, and which, you know, in certain instances, it's amazing, as is all allopathic, like Western medicine. There are moments when it's a godsend, and there's no judgment for me around that decision when it really comes up in the deepest way, and is like there's a deep call toward that choice,
rather than being sort of a mindless, like, we're kind of churning you out on this path.
Exactly. And that's I think why that one is disturbing me a little bit, because I'm hearing things about workplaces offering insurance packages for young women, or women in their 20s and 30s, with an option for egg freezing, so you can just freeze those eggs at your ripe moment, and then not have to worry about derailing your career, which is what happens in this country because we don't have proper maternity support or leave or anything. And that's just like an easy little thing you can pop to the doctor and do, in the same way that we were handed birth control. That I don't like.
And it's not easy, because it's in a sense causing all of these unintended side effects that I think happens when you mess with nature without having any wisdom behind it. It's just a sense of control and convenience placed on our bodies. And that's that feeling I have about being a woman, that it's so inconvenient. It's so kind of pushes back against how technology is set up for optimization, for convenience sake. And I think my body isn't convenient. It's like a period is not convenient.
No.
And there was one YouTuber who we both watch, which I noticed she started doing on her videos, where she said, new videos every Wednesdays and Saturdays except when I'm menstruating. And I thought that was so cool.
Yes. Yes.
She was just open about it. She said, I need a break. And she's like in a space where she can do that. Most people aren't in that kind of a situation, but it is, I think, what we deeply need, to have some sort of support around being a woman and feeling like this. For me, it's just this feeling of this world wasn't made for me. That's like my deep pain that I go to, that I think has to do with that. I started feeling it when I got my first job and started moving into the workforce, and this feeling like this was built for men, or I don't know, there was just something about the way the modern world or the workplace was structured that it felt, not through any individual person treating me in a way, because I did have that same feeling like I'm equal, I can do anything, and I felt successful in my job, and I don't really even know what the solution is, but it is just that feeling of not feeling at home in society somehow.
Yeah, I think I'm moved by how you frame that and describe that, and I think, you know, this world wasn't made for women or anybody who is outside of a certain definition of maleness that isn't even necessarily healthy for it to be constantly, what is at play in the structures around us. And I was just thinking about the YouTuber that you mentioned, that everybody who has the kind of job where you can do that, and and it doesn't mean that you're treated a certain way about, oh, you're menstruating, we want somebody who doesn't menstruate at all because, you have to take a rest every however often. In all the places where we have the privilege to be able to do that, I feel like it's really radical and important to do so. And I actually had this experience recently in it was a webinar for the class that I mentioned at the end of our last episode, leading up to it, where I was bleeding. It was the first day of my period. One of the women who works for Advaya and was helping run it was bleeding. And we said something at the beginning about the fact that two of us were menstruating. Kiara, the other one, was like, I'm not menstruating anymore. I'm menopausal. We were all just saying it at the beginning. And I was saying it because I was really genuinely on the first day of my period and hoping I was going to be able to communicate well because I have a painful period. And somebody in the comments got upset, another woman, and found it just gross. She didn't want to hear about it, and she didn't understand why we needed to speak about it. And it really threw me off in the moment that
That's actually shocking in that situation.
It was shocking in the context because of the content of the course about matrilineal root systems and matriarchies. But I also and it was actually a little upsetting. I couldn't get my center back for a moment because I felt embarrassed and I felt shamed. And I also felt I get that is the impulse to say something like that or to be made. She was made uncomfortable by it for reasons that are culturally really understandable. And I think, I've had conversations with my mom about this before that I think especially maybe in her generation, this idea that we could find equality in our difference in a gendered way is still so edgy because I think as women, it's there's this idea that in the workplace, if we need paid time off 3 days a month for bleeding, which we should have.
Absolutely.
Because our culture isn't balanced to really understand the beauty and the power of menstruation, that will be held against probably female workers until we get to a place where that's different. And I think, my mom's expressed concern about that. And I think in her generation especially, that would have been the pattern. And maybe we're in a moment where that's changing, but we're in the ugly discomfort of the period where it's changing, hopefully. We pray that it's changing. But I don't see a lot of evidence that it is, but
Yeah, that brings up so many things for me because in some ways I could see women saying that, don't say that because that's going to be used against us.
Yes, exactly.
And that's historically why we've needed to fight for our rights, is all the things female being used against us.
Yes.
But what I saw happen in the wake of that, in the wake of all these different waves of feminism, is in some aspects women turning against their own bodies.
Yes.
And this desire to have women be just like men in order to be equal, in order to express themselves equally. And I remember a filmmaker who I love, Britt Marling, wrote an amazing article about this in the New York Times where she said, I don't want to be your strong female lead. I don't want to be punching out the bad guy and kicking and whatever. It's fantasy in all these superhero movies, but I agreed with her so much because that is also a part of the brokenness that I feel with certain types of modern day feminism in erasing the differences, erasing the specificities of your body and really embracing it and thinking the better way to be is a masculine way. The better way to live is to ignore your body and not have any. So it's tricky because it's I understand not wanting that to be used against you, and I feel like there's maybe something that's wanting to happen with men being more understanding of women's bodies and more empathetic, because so long they have been, either by their choice or by the culture, been kept out of even knowing how women's bodies work.
Yes, that it was like a taboo to know, or just
Be there during your birth.
humiliating. Forget it.
Yeah.
You do not see any of that. They're not supposed to be there, and there's a taboo like separation during menstruation. This idea that we are like unclean, which you see in religious contexts all over the world, and you see it even in what I find this interesting, that you see it in anthropological interpretations of indigenous cultures. But often, I've been reading about this recently and also speaking to some indigenous women saying that's partly the effect of colonization. Like the anthropological lens that's interpreting a certain way, what it means when we separate ourselves while we menstruate, combined with the effects of colonization on our men. Of patriarchy on our men, making older patterns in certain cultures like be less present. Like even in indigenous cultures, I'm thinking of the Haudenosaunee people in upstate New York. One of the women I've spoken to just talking about noticing that things have been lost because of colonization, taking away from the matrilineal root system and power structure. And so they've even
their own culture.
Yeah, like they've even partly forgotten the menstrual rituals because of these Western forces.
And I wonder if the original inception of that concept was either this is a time women need to be by themselves and they need to rest, or rather than being unclean. Or I don't know if I'm misremembering something, but are there some cultures where it was also seen as a sacred time for women's knowledge? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I mean, just thinking of I'm thinking of the Haudenosaunee context, and also things I've read and heard about the Diné Navajo menstrual rituals. But what's coming to my mind first right now is this conversation I had with a woman here in California speaking about, it might have been Pomo Indian tribes, which are in this area of California, where there's this kind of commonly spoken about taboo that women while bleeding couldn't touch men's hunting tools, so they couldn't touch the bow and arrow. And I've read about this in a few different anthropological contexts. And she said she'd spoken to a native elder here, a man, and he had said, but the reason for that is not because we think women are unclean when they're bleeding. It's because they're so powerful. The literal life force, like the life of the earth, is pouring out of them. Their power is so intense that everything we've done in the sweat lodge for weeks will get blown to bits.
Wow.
If they just touch our bow and arrow.
Wow.
And so there's nothing about uncleanness. There's something dark and scary about you. It's that, it's an acknowledgement of the amount of power that's emanating from a woman while bleeding that will mess with the man's hunting magic. And that makes sense to me. And I think I was telling you something recently about research I saw that female doctors are doing, maybe in the last decade, but attention on this research I've only seen recently. They've been researching menstrual blood and stem cells in the menstrual blood.
That's
and that
so
it's a source. It's like an endless source of powerfully healing stem cells that we normally think that we need to go into the bone marrow to get. And so these menstrual taboos that probably originate in menstrual reverence are recognizing, in a way, this very thing that science and female doctors are researching right now, that the cells that can heal and that form life are coming out of our bodies.
I mean, it makes so much sense, and it's like a certain type of very scientific mind would only accept that knowledge when they start researching it, even though it's an ancient form of knowing.
That is how we work in this culture. But I think without question, this idea of women going and bleeding together, separated, I feel certain that it originates in from a place of deep beauty and sacredness, and that possibly the origin of like ritual itself or religious consciousness, I might go so far as to say, is birthed there in our species.
Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense to me. And I even like when I'm bleeding, there is a sense where it's like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to be by myself. But there's also a sense of feeling really powerful.
Yeah.
That I love and I want to get back, because when I first started getting my period when I was young, I felt really embarrassed.
Yeah.
And maybe that's unavoidable in a sense, because puberty is weird and embarrassing. But I also, nowadays I think it's just so beautiful when it happens. It's this, we were talking about earlier, this idea of blood, but in a life-giving, non-violent sense of like bleeding. Because the only other sense we know bleeding like that is from wounds, from violence, from accidents, from things like that.
Yeah.
But it's this sort of life-giving source
within
us.
It's astounding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is like an oracular time. I think it was thought of as an oracular time in many contexts. And I also feel for myself that, there can be this like such an intense emotional buildup. And then finally when I start bleeding, it's the time of the month that I feel the earth most clearly. It's like I can feel the rhythms of things differently. Because in a way, not to affirm what some of the weird ancient Greek guys said, but I do feel that my consciousness, my intellect descends into my womb. But it's amazing. It's not like I become stupid.
No.
It's like, but finally the intensity of mental activity quiets. And there's this other awareness and consciousness that I can feel, that's the thing that we have buried for so long and that we're afraid of, because it is not afraid of the deep cycles of death and rebirth and the discomfort of them and the terror. I'm just thinking of what you said about also, what did you say? Did you say that we kind of get the sense that our bodies are inconvenient?
Yeah.
Or I loved that.
Yeah.
That was that's exactly it.
It kind of fights against
the
modern structures of the world, I think.
Yeah.
And
pushes hard back. Yeah.
It's interesting for you to even admit that, or even say, reinterpreting the women are unclean during their period, or women's brains go in their wombs and that makes them crazy, and sort of thinking, well, where did these ideas come from? And is that not really the original meaning of those ideas? And also, I wonder if this feminine body connection, this knowledge that our culture has tried to diminish, tried to erase, and simply valuing this more brain intellectual knowledge. I don't even know if I would say masculine knowledge, but you could say maybe masculine way of knowing that we all have within us also.
Yes. Yeah.
But it makes me that much even more concerned. I don't even know if this exists, but I know it's probably going to happen in the future, where, we have surrogates. That's still not childbirth outside of the body. It's still a human body. But if you even told ancient people about that, I think they would think that was insane.
Just
the concept of
it. Not possible.
Yeah. Magic.
It would, you're right.
And I'm thinking of this show that I loved when I was a kid called Kyle XY. Did you ever watch that show? It was about a human who was gestated in this artificial way, and he doesn't have a belly button. And he comes and I'm jealous. Actually, the show, it goes into this thing, like, because he was gestated for so long, his brain is, I think I'm remembering like this, his brain, he's just so much smarter than all of us because he gestated for like years instead of just 9 months. And he has no belly button. So he's sort of like a superhero in a way. But in the show, he would often lift up his shirt and there's no belly button. And then I was thinking, in a convenient world, quote unquote convenient, pregnancy is so inconvenient.
Yeah.
So painful, dangerous.
Yeah.
Why not just have little womb pods?
Isn't there a movie that came out about this recently?
I think there are. Yeah, I think there are movies.
Which I saw the preview for and I was like,
it's so disturbing.
no, I can't watch this. I'm really upset.
But I'm feeling like I know that some portion of humanity is going to go down that road, and that's what I mean about like having to make a choice. How far do we go?
Ooh.
What would be lost in a generation of children and people who don't know the experience of pregnancy or birth, and children who don't, children without belly buttons?
I think it would be spiritually and emotionally and psychologically catastrophic for our species, actually, because there's so much, I mean, for so many reasons, but there's just thinking about like the development of our nervous systems and how much psychological science and study even that there is, as well as childbirth and like gestational work that points to all of the different hormone cascades and hormones. Well, I guess they would get all of that like sort of siphoned into the pod, all the right hormones, but
there's going to be consequences.
There will, without question, there are consequences, because it never goes well when we play God. It's like, it doesn't go well with this kind of thing. It doesn't go well in the stories either, but like the process of birth and then the bonding that happens and the hormones that the mother needs to bond with the baby to bring the milk down. I think that that connection would be altered in a way that we can't even conceive of what those consequences are. And I think it would create a generation or generations of deeply unwell, lonely, like psychologically,
it's just bringing me back to our
devastated
about
children.
Aliens.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like
They don't have belly buttons.
Oh my God, Simone!
Sorry, I'm scared.
It's them.
Yeah.
No, and I also don't want to, like, if that, I would not discriminate against those without belly buttons, but I pray that doesn't happen, because I think we will have completely lost the plot, to use a British phrase, lost the plot of everything and missed the point of our human experience. It's such an important like question and thing to think about, and I think I avoid even thinking about this because I kind of can't bear it.
I understand.
But
I just thought of it now while we were talking, and the hard part too is with all the reproductive technologies and with all technology in general, there is some genuine good result out of women who are longing for a child and can't have one, and they can get help and actually have a child, and all these things that are just like genuine good. So it's so challenging to push back, in a sense.
It is. Yeah, and I think I really agree with you and hear that, and I think that I guess in the end, it's not the technology that's the danger, it's us, and it's our sense of like embodied spiritual balance and well-being that's really the thing. That if we're moving from a place that is kind of whatever, I'm not going to try to define that right now, because but maybe you can, I feel like our viewers can kind of get a sense of what we both might mean by that. Then those circumstances that arise where you're 42 and finally are with the love of your life and really, really want a baby, and you can have a baby because of reproductive technologies and support and help, or something has happened to your womb and, whatever, all those options, like where there will always be cases where that would be a miraculous gift.
Yeah.
I think, because I think creating a black and white binary out of anything, also
That's
never
dangerous.
goes well.
Yeah.
It never goes well no matter what. It's dangerous, and it's lacking in I think creativity too, in a way. To be able to hold complexity is like what the earth does. This is a vastly complex planet, and I think it's also good to remember that everything we create ultimately is still Earth's.
It's hard for me to think that way.
I mean, same.
Yeah.
and I sort of have this feeling that I don't know, things are not looking amazing in terms of how we're doing, and I don't know that we're going to get to the point where we have uterus pods before there are collapses of systems that mean that I don't know. Who
That's
knows?
true.
But I do wonder, because we're playing with fire in a really terrifying way.
That's
So the earth might decide
she might fight
she's
back.
not going to let us. She's like, you've gone too far. I am the uterus pod, okay?
She is the ultimate
Hello.
uterus pod.
What is wrong? Was I not enough? What is this weird little plastic thing you made?
Something I was thinking about too, in you talking about the feminine body ways of knowing that are sometimes even hard to put into words, because it's not within those bounds. I constantly am thinking about all the knowledge, all the things that we can't speak out loud, that we can't write, because either there are no words for it, or our brains can't conceive of the language, but our bodies can feel that knowledge. And it really does make me think about how in a very masculinized culture, even where women are taught to feel that masculine is the ideal, subconsciously they might not put it in those terms. And also I think about a lot of the spaces, a lot of the classes you teach, matrilineal cultures, matriarchies. Not a lot of men are interested in learning about those things, or maybe they don't feel it's a place they're welcome. I don't know. But I do have some sense of like the healing needing to come from that side too.
From the male.
From the male side.
Yeah.
Really understanding and being able to hold the feminine side. And I don't know what that looks like, but it's something that I have this intuition that feels like that is necessary for women to say to anyone, not just a group of women. I have my period, I'm not feeling well. And to say that to a man and have him not be like, ugh.
Or like,
why would you tell me that? One
one of the things that can often be said in response as well is, I'm so sorry your stomach hurts. I'm like,
it's not
my stomach doesn't hurt. But bless you, I think it's just like really uncomfortable to even speak it. Because if you think about how much it's taken, just even, I think for myself in my lifetime, to be able to speak comfortably about my womb or my uterus, it's taken a while. And I have one, and it's, anyway, so I get why it's uncomfortable. But I really like what you're saying about this need for men and the masculine to feel welcomed into the conversations around matrilineal culture. And I think that's one of the reasons I don't like to use the word matriarchy, because I don't like the way that it posits competition with patriarchy. That like, hey, we're over here in our girls club, F you guys. We really want to be Amazons and like kill you all after we have sex with you and have babies.
That's some species of animal, but not...
There are some species, but not us.
Not us. And if anyone hasn't listened to the first conversation between us, you really go into why a matrilineal culture is not that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do I?
Well, you talk about the kind of more circularity of it, the less hierarchical structures.
Exactly. Yeah, and what I want to say about it right now is that like a matrilineal culture is actually better for everybody. Because it's not about female power over males. It's very egalitarian. And there tends to be a respect. I'm just realizing how dirty my hands are from being in the garden. Okay. It's from the garden. There's a sense of, and of course this varies culture to culture, but like there is still a sense of gendered activities, but it doesn't seem to be as much about men have to do this, women have to do this, but rather spheres that are honored, but that also in cultures like this, you often see it as kind of a more acceptable thing that some people who were born as men would prefer to be in the women's house and dress as women and do women's work, and vice versa. And there seems to be evidence of that, like in, the pre-patriarchal Aegean as well as beyond. But I think the point of a matrilineal or matrilocal culture, in the way that I'm interested in them, is a culture that centers life and the protection of life, the protection of the life givers, both the mothers, the children, but also like the regenerative capacity of the earth and the well-being of the soil and the seeds and the well-being of the animals in the forest. In one of the units in my When Women Were the Land course, I talk about particularly there's Sami, Northern European Sami people come from the far north of Finland and like into Russia, and they're an indigenous people up in the north there, and they still have sort of intact memories and practices around bear feasts and bear hunt like protocol. And in the old stories, both of the Sami and also the Finnish people in this national epic of theirs that they have called the Kalevala, which has its issues, but it retains a lot of folkloric knowledge. They talk about a mistress of the forest who is the guardian of the wild animals of the forest. And the hunters have to behave toward her with respect and propitiate her and ask her permission before the animals are given to them in the hunt. And so there's this sense that, and I would posit that in its earliest roots, those cultures were matrilineal. And I think with the Sami, I don't know enough, but there are a lot of facets of that still. But this idea that all the systems of life are honored and the mothers of life are centered, but we're all children of the mothers of life. All men, all women, everybody, we're all children of those mothers. And so such cultures are meant to be welcoming to all. They're not that scary inverse that I think the ancient Greeks, just as an example, were obsessed with the Amazons, the Amazon women. They were like obsessed and like were really freaked out by them.
Really?
But they were really fascinated. They would talk about them a lot, but they were clearly really like worried.
That they would come and eat them.
Yeah, they would come in like with one of their, the myth was that they would chop off one breast, the Amazon women, so that their bow, on their bow side.
Wow.
Because it was like, who needs it?
I didn't know that.
And I don't know how true that is.
I didn't know that.
But there was just like elaborate myths about these matriarchal women who were like man-eating and a threat to settled patriarchal classical Greece. So that's not what I'm interested in.
See, I think
that's what gets conjured, right?
It does. I didn't really know what that meant, what matrilineal or we don't want to say matriarchy. We
can.
Well, we can, but I understand why you don't want to say it. In my head, when I first heard those terms, I thought you were talking about cultures where it was just like women running the show instead of men, and that to me didn't totally feel all the way right too. So it's hard even with the name with the word matra to have people from the outside think that.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a better word.
Well, actually, there's a scholar whose book, The Chalice and the Blade, was really popular, Ryan Eisler, spelled Riane, a female scholar, and she wrote that book kind of in the wake of Maria Gimbutas's work, the Lithuanian archaeologist, and the big, like, kind of swell of feminist and goddess culture excitement that had its good and bad sides after Maria. And Ryan Eisler's book was really formative in that time, The Chalice and the Blade, and she calls them partnership societies instead of matrilineal, which I think
that's sweet.
I think that was an effective description or an effective descriptor, and I think the reason I use matrilineal is because right now my work is oriented toward women or toward the feminine. And I like the matrilineal because it has matriline, and I'm interested in the mother lines. Well, but I get why it's not very like welcoming to.
Just because it's not a common
term that you
Yeah.
learn in history class or whatever. And so, but I also understand the value of that term too, because it does describe an essence of those cultures being centered around the mother. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it would be great if we could get to the point where we didn't feel like embarrassed or resistant to that. But I also, on the other hand, see in the great swing of history how, we've spent such a long time in the father language religion. And before that, it seems that we did spend a long time in the mother cultures. And so maybe what the earth needs right now is a word that's more
Unitive?
unitive. Non-binary isn't right just because it evokes another concept, which is great, but not quite what I mean. I think unitive actually is the more all-encompassing. And I think we've got a ways to go.
Constantly, we're just, as humans, just swinging back and forth to extremes until, like, hopefully one day we'll be in balance.
Well, we still have a habitable planet. Yes. Like, please.
Well, this was a really great second conversation.
It really was.
I really liked.
We could just keep
going. Okay, we could just keep going, but we have a time limit. Yes. So, is there anything else you want to mention about your work, where people can find you on Substack?
I think so. Yeah, I have a Substack called The Pollen Basket, and I, write a lot about this there. Although it's having a little rest season right now, but there's a lot of archives. And my course, and I think on my Substack, people can find things about forthcoming. I have some forthcoming book projects, which I'll just say, like, go check out my website and my Pollen Basket to find out more.
Thank you so much for listening to my second conversation with Sylvia. I think we got into a lot of things that are about the feminine, that are things that I've always wanted to talk about with somebody, but haven't. So I feel like I expressed a lot about my inner feelings about growing up in this culture. And I have so many more ideas for things I want to discuss further based on this conversation. If you want to check out some of Sylvia's work, you can go find her at sylviavictorlinstead.com and on her Substack, The Pollen Basket, which I highly recommend. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.